Welcome to the Memories of a Moonbird podcast, exploring life one story at a time. Hello friends, I'm Daniel Scherl, and today on the show, for over 40 years and with over 200 IMDb credits, he's made you laugh, cry, and feel everything in between. You've seen him in shows and movies like Ally McBeal, Home Improvement, Small Soldiers, Hail Caesar, Gremlins, The Howling, and the Orville, just to scratch the surface of his long and distinguished career. Since the 1980s, he's been a staple on television, film, and stage. He's played iconic roles like Dr. Dick Richards on China Beach, the Cowboy in Innerspace, Coach Cutlip on The Wonder Years, the Emergency Medical Hologram, or EMH, on Star Trek Voyager, and Richard Woolsey on Stargate. And if all that's not impressive enough, this Emmy-nominated actor has also been a director and is an accomplished author and singer. In his real life, he's a proud dad of 2 daughters, and he's on the executive board of the Planetary Society, which is the nonprofit space advocacy organization that was originally formed by Carl Sagan, Friedman and Bruce Murray. I've also heard that he makes a pretty awesome pasta. So, as I give a big shout out to our mutual friend John Billingsley for hooking us up, it is a real pleasure and honor to welcome Robert Picardo. Bob, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Daniel. Thank you for having me. And thank you for being a friend of John Billingsley. I can't imagine the amount of personal sacrifice that involves. He knows I'm only kidding. We like to rib each other. I adore John Billingsley and have nothing but admiration for him.
Absolutely agree. And big shout out again to you, John, and of course, Bonnie. We love you both. So, Bob, first question. You were born and raised in Philadelphia, correct?
Mm-hmm.
So what was it like for you growing up in the 50s and 60s in Philly?
Well, my dad was a businessman, owned a furniture store near Connie Mack Stadium, which is where the Phillies used to play, across the street from my cousin's Italian restaurant. So there was Picardo's furniture facing Picardi's restaurant, because some of my family spells their name with an I instead of an O. So that was kind of funny. Even at 9 years old, I found that funny. So because my dad was doing pretty well, we had Cadillacs. I remember having a pink and black Cadillac before the tail fins came out, a two-tone with a black top and a pink car. And then I was sent to a particularly wonderful school called the William Penn Charter School, a Quaker day school founded by William Penn before we were a nation.
Oh, cool.
So Philadelphia, I lived in a nice sort of suburban neighborhood. We had a big backyard. I was not a good athlete in school, I have to tell you. When I was younger and I was a little chubby, I played goalie in soccer just because I was wide enough that I covered more of the goal, I think, than the average player did. But I was a good student, and I was kind of shy, as I recall, especially when I was quite young. My childhood was fairly idyllic with one major screw up, and that is that my father died suddenly at age 54 when I was only 9 years old. I am the youngest of 4 children, so I was only 9. So that was the only major, that was the only major event in my childhood that was obviously very unhappy and devastating, and of course changed the course of not only my young life, but certainly my adult life as well.
If I can ask, in what way do you think it most profoundly affected you today, looking back?
Well, I've wondered throughout my life whether my father would have wanted me to become an actor. He was a very supportive man, so I think once I became an actor, I think he would have been as supportive as my mother and the rest of the family was. But I always wondered if he would have liked that. My father and my mother, both first generation born in America, Italian Americans, meaning all 4 of my grandparents came over from Italy in the first decade and perhaps into the beginning of the second decade of the 20th century. They all settled in Philadelphia, and my father only went through 9th grade because his father died in the last pandemic, the great pandemic
influenza?
Of 1918, the influenza pandemic. So my father had to drop out of school as the oldest child and take care of the family. So I was the first generation that went to college, indeed, that finished high school, although my mother, of course, finished high school. My mother told me later in life that she very much wanted to be a pharmacist, but her father would not send her to pharmacy school. She had to work right after high school, I think because of that old notion that a woman was meant to get married and not to have a career.
Yeah.
So, and I think that my mother, who's a hero to all four of the children in the family, we all have tremendous admiration and respect for my mom. She passed at age 84. My mother had me very late in life. I was the surprise baby, and my mother was nearly 44 years old, I think, when she was born.
Oh, wow.
So my mother used to look me in the eye and say, well, they told me you'd be a genius or a moron, and then never ventured an opinion either way. And I'd look at her like, but she had her own dry sense of humor.
I'm very curious, were you aware at this age of all the events going on in the world, like in the turmoil of the 60s and whatnot?
Well, yes, of course, because I remember clearly the day that Martin Luther King was assassinated, because I rarely ever got sick and rarely ever stayed home from school. And other than when my father passed away and I was in fourth grade, and of course I spent a week at home after that. I do remember very clearly that I was home from school sick that day when Martin Luther King was killed. And that was obviously, culturally, it was the most tumultuous period, perhaps, of our history, depending on your point of view, up until January of this past year.
What's a kind of a funny story your parents would have told about you as a child? I
think the first time we ever got on a plane, I was probably 4 or 5 years old, something like that. And we flew to Florida to spend the summer there, or at least a month of the summer there. My Aunt Rita, my mother's baby sister, so my Aunt Rita and Uncle Joe had seen us off, had, I guess, driven us all to the airport. So it was my mom and dad, and then my brother and 2 sisters, and they were all on the plane. They went down on got on the plane. And both my mother and my father each thought that they had me in tow.
Oh, no.
And so when they got on the plane, they said, "Where's Bobby? Where's Bobby?"
It's a Home Alone story.
And they looked out through the glass. That was back before they had jetways. So you walked down onto the tarmac. They looked back into the viewing window where my aunt and uncle are waving. And unbeknownst to my aunt and uncle, at knee level, I'm there going like this, waving away to them. Because there was no way I was getting on that plane. I was perfectly happy with my aunt and uncle. So yes, hilarious. They almost took off without me. And in modern day, if this ever happened, once they're on the plane, they probably would have had to leave without me or whatever. But
do you have a trait today in your life you've carried with you your entire existence that's distinctively Philadelphia?
I do have, when I'm tired, I do have some of the Philadelphia vowel sounds that I, cautiously stamped out of myself. I went to a good, college prep school, so people tended not to have Philadelphia accents, but a lot of my cousins, talked like, "Hey, Bobby, how you doing? I saw you on that Star Trek thing. I don't get it. What are they talking about? I don't, so, and Star Trek, of course, you can't have any regionalisms in your speech. So you're allowed to have a British captain, apparently, on Next Generation, but they don't want anybody going, "Hey, please state the nature of the medical emergency. Oh, Captain, there's a subspace anomaly on the deck 13. What do I do?" So I had to get rid of the Philly accent. But a trait, I think anybody from Philly still loves a good sandwich, because Philadelphia, along with New York, are known for their sandwiches. Obviously, a steak sandwich. My particular favorite, although I don't eat red meat anymore, but my favorite was always Tony Luke's, 14th Street in Oregon. You get a pork Italian sandwich with aged provolone and broccoli rabe. It's delicious.
Sounds fantastic.
We'd say in Philly, it's beautiful.
So it's well known that you started Yale as pre-med and then switched over to theater. Mm-hmm. The irony of you playing a doctor several times is, of course, very funny. But did you ever regret not pursuing medicine? In essence, did the doctor ever want to be a doctor?
Well, that's a great question. I am married to a doctor. I have enormous respect for the profession. It was my childhood ambition to be a doctor. I don't know how much of it was really based in reality. I think as a kid, I was very impressed with my pediatrician. He was a very dignified man, an Italian gentleman with the name Cuccianata, but he looked so distinguished in his crisp white. He wore like a white blazer. It was sort of like a short lab jacket, I guess. And he had glasses, and he just was a very elegant and had a very calm and friendly demeanor to kids. So I was impressed with him. So that may be why I wanted to be. I went to Yale to be a doctor. I think all children, though, when they say, when you're 5, 6, 7, 8 years old, you say you want to be a doctor when you grow up, suddenly the parents, their faces light up with joy. Or they did anyway before managed healthcare. I don't know about anymore. But in any case, I was a good student, particularly good in science. And so I did. I was pre-med at Yale my first year and a half, but I continued to do theater for fun. I just loved it. But I never took it seriously because my feeling was with an immigrant family, the first generation of children go into business. The second generation born here become doctors and lawyers, professional people. The third generation go into the arts. That's the impression I had. Mm-hmm. So I short-circuited a generation, and that's why I always wondered whether my dad would have supported it. However, my mother used to say when she was alive, and certainly my siblings always say that my father loved public speaking. He was very involved in the community. My father was in civic organizations, president of the Lions Club. He hosted a giant dinner every year in Philadelphia for the blind. So my father was deeply committed to giving back and helping the community, the Knights of Columbus, the Italian service organization. And he loved to speak publicly. So the word is my father would have loved me being a performer and would have been renting buses and taking them when I was in a Broadway show.
Well, not only that, but I can't imagine that your dad doesn't look down and see all you've accomplished for the world and your influence on just pop culture and the positivity you've brought through your roles to the world, the entertainment, the fun, and the serious stuff, the thoughts you've provoked amongst other human beings. It's an incredible thing. And for any artist to have achieved that kind of status and influence is a really remarkable thing in a human life, I think.
That's very kind. As I said, I can't really comment on that, but I will say that the very first play I was in on Broadway, my character was very Italian-American, and I often wonder what my father would have thought of that, because we were sort of solid middle-class Italians, and the family I was in my first Broadway show were lower-class Italians, so there was a lot of foul language and all that. But the show was a huge hit and ran forever on Broadway, ran 4 years, although I left it after near the end of the first year to go on and do the play with Jack Lemmon.
Well, I was actually going to ask you, has your Italian heritage ever had any influence on your career specifically?
I have, I'm very close friends with the wonderful actor Joe Pantoliano, and Joe has struggled to get away from just playing Italian roles. I love to play Italian roles and never get them, it seems like. Joey, I used to tease Joey, we were younger actors, that he was a professional Italian, along with some of my other Italian actor friends who often played, obviously Italian characters. I think I've played Jewish characters as often as I've played Italian characters, but most often I play, just it's not clear, what the character's ethnicity is, which is great, which is as it should be. I mean, like, for example, the hologram on Star Trek. Is he an Italian-American hologram? No, he's a hologram.
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I'm Jewish and I grew up in Cleveland, but Cleveland has a very, very rich Italian community, and my best friends were Sicilian growing up. Mm-hmm. And so my friend Eddie, his grandmother used to look at me and say, Jew is just an Italian turned inside out.
You know what? What I would say, the conversion factor to go from Jew to Italian is chicken equals tomato.
Yeah.
Everything you do with a chicken, we do with a tomato.
It's hilarious. Well, Bob, you've been fortunate enough to have an extensive and incredible career, as we already mentioned. And I'm curious, because you've covered so many different mediums, do you have a favorite, like between theater, television, film, et cetera? Is there one that you would choose over the others if you had to do it the rest of your life?
Well, Walter Matthau used to call film acting retirement acting, because he was a big theater actor when he was a younger man. It's quite a discipline. I love working in all media. I love going back to the theater. I've done a number of plays throughout my career. And so I've continued to do theater, but in more recent years, I just would love to be on a Broadway stage again. It's one of the reasons I'm spending more time in New York. I did a little off-Broadway musical almost exactly 2 years ago called Enter Laughing, based on the classic Carl Reiner novel, playing the father of the lead kid. And it's a show I also did in California about 4 or 5 years ago. So I'm back spending more time in New York, hoping to do more theater work. And then, of course, the pandemic strikes and theater is off the table for a year and a half. And, and for actors for whom that is their sole livelihood, I felt particularly sympathetic to them.
Yeah.
So I loved the answer to your question that I've never really given is that I love working in all media, and it's the variety that appeals to me most. But at this stage of my life, it's, I suspect I'm going to be working more in television and the occasional film role than theater, but I hope that I'm wrong.
Well, I know you've worked with Joe Dante quite a bit over the years. Which of his movies was your favorite one to act in, and why?
Well, I think the best role of all of them, and I think Joe would agree, is the cowboy in Innerspace. It wasn't much on paper and only had a few lines, and Spielberg produced Innerspace. So Joe knew me well enough, and I'd worked with him a number of times at that point, and he wanted me to play that character. But Spielberg wanted the character to be scary because he's the villain. And Joe, because it's a romantic comedy, the movie, thought the character should be funnier than scary, but still believable as a villain, but still funny. So I remember Joe Dante, and Joe has a unique way of talking that sounds a little bit like one of the mosquitoes on the old Raid commercials. He's saying, well, Stephen thinks, that the character should be scary, but, I want him to be funny. So we have to fool Stephen that you're going to be scary, and then we'll do what we want. Basically is what he said.
Hilarious.
So I had to do a tape test for Spielberg that I looked kind of scary in, and Joe shot it on one of those early video cameras. This is 1983 or whatever, this giant video camera. And he very harshly lit me from one side. So my face, I look like, a Brando close-up in Apocalypse Now, where this, this side is the sun and it falls off into darkness. But the character they said was, I can't even remember. I think they said he was from Albania. I think that's the line was he's from Albania. Well, at that time, I don't think we had no internet, and I didn't have I didn't even think to look up where Albania was. I just decided, you know what? Muammar Gaddafi was making a lot of trouble back then and was on the cover of Time magazine in his late 20s. I decided I wanted to look like Muammar Gaddafi, and I was going to have kind of a Middle Eastern accent. I just made all this stuff up. So, and when I did the reading, I also put a gold tooth on just to make me look scary. I got a almond roca wrapper and glued a gold tooth on.
Really?
And that's when they ended up putting that in the movie and making it a plot point even.
That's hilarious.
But I had this kind of cheesy, sort of indistinguishable kind of Middle Eastern accent. And there was no script to read. So what I did was I said, I love this country. America's a beautiful country. I'd like to sing for you some of my favorite American songs. I got spurs that jingle, yangle, jingle. And I just did a medley, and I just mispronounced everything. That was what I did. And one of them was, I did I'm an Old Cowhand, and I sang Yippee-I-Oh-Hi.
Yeah.
And they thought that was so funny that they had to put that in the movie. So that's what I did for the audition. And then most of the lines I have in the movie, I made up.
That's awesome. That's really awesome.
And Joe was great that way because he kind of would let you do that. He'd let you kind of run with it, Well,
do you as an actor prefer a director that lets you improv and kind of play around within the script? Or do you like something a little more rigid and, strict to the words on the page?
I like any good director I like working with. And Joe happens to be that way, very freewheeling. And certainly in a comedy, I think it's nice to be able to be a little loose with, and if you improvise a line that's funny, to be able to do that, to put it in. But there are other directors I've had that I love working with as well. But Joe, I have a long-standing relationship with. Even in a big movie with a big budget, he always seems completely relaxed, like you're all there to play, and he listens to actors. So yes, it's great to work with him. But I don't want to falsely create the impression that I love, that I don't pay attention to the script. I learned the script word for word exactly as it is.
Yeah.
And it just depends on the script. That character barely said a word. So when I was making up jokes, it was simply because there were scenes where he didn't speak at all or said one line.
Well, and isn't it true that as an actor, if you want to be able to improv and play, I don't want to say properly, but with the most freedom and the best performance, you need to know the script inside out so that you understand where you're coming from, so you know where you're going.
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, it's good to have a big picture concept of how your character. No director wants an actor who's there in a self-aggrandizing manner. Just, I want more camera time and I want more lines. So they're just basically trying to camera hog. But if you take a sketchy character that is kind of just an idea, I mean, Joe complimented me by saying whenever I had a part I didn't know how to cast it, he would give it to Picardo because he knew I would do something with it.
That's great.
So if you just did the Cowboy as written was very, very thumbnail. There was not much there. And once I knew I had the freedom to be funny, I wanted to make him every woman's nightmare of a guy at a bar who latches onto her and won't leave her alone. I literally wanted him to be the most self-absorbed, self-loving guy ever.
I think I know that guy.
Yeah, well, because, and the other joke was he called himself the Cowboy because back when Innerspace came out, the #1 show internationally around the world, the most popular American television show was Dallas.
Yeah.
So the idea that this guy came from a totally different culture, but fashioned himself as an American cowboy, that was the essential joke of the character that was in the script.
Huh.
So that's why I did songs that were from the West, so to speak.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was there was a lot of freedom there to do that. And Joe knew that I could improvise because when we did the Howling, whenever when there was a makeup pause because something had to be repaired in the makeup, I would simply improvise jokes just, to make the crew laugh.
Well, actually, I really want to touch on something with that. You're known around the world for all the big roles, of course, but what a lot of people don't know is the amount of really cool stuff you've done, like the voice of the Johnny Cab in Total Recall, and you were Meg Mucklebones in Legend, which is one of my favorite movies, actually. And I'm curious, that was such a scary and heavy prosthetic character. What was it like working with prosthetics for that? And also, you worked at Pinewood, and I know for a fact that particular era on Legend, that was the largest scale set ever built for a movie at that time.
And it burned down.
Yeah.
Well, Legend, the scary part was being in water, in a makeup that took on water. So you were like a wet sponge. And Legend was quite dangerous, I have to tell you. If I didn't stand up for myself, it was just,
I remember hearing about something with the floor, and if it came up too fast, it could have decapitated you or something like that.
Well, I was on a little tiny trap door that was less than 3 feet by 3 feet. The water set had a steel floor and 3 feet of water, and then it had another 16 feet of water below it and a trap door that I was on, and they wanted to lower me down several feet below the stage floor.
Oh, wow.
So that because water would calm and I would come up through a crystal pool, but I had no breathing device. Well, you know how it is. If you take a giant, huge sponge, 160-pound sponge, and yank it down, how long is it going to take the water to get still? Maybe 4 minutes, right? So I literally heard the AD talking to Ridley Scott going, blah, 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 we want to do this. And I said to the AD afterwards, I said, if you pull me down below the floor level, first of all, I have no breathing apparatus. As you wait, you'll have no idea if I'm in distress. You could keep me down too long. I can't let you know if I need a breath. But then when you push me up, I said, I'm in this giant body sponge. If my body recoils with the resistance of the water pushing up, and my arm extends over this tiny trap door I'm on.
Slice right off.
You're pushing the trap up. You could shear my arm off, or if my body recoils backwards, you could decapitate me. Yeah. And he goes, yes, I suppose you're right. Well, we'd better rehearse this then. And I'm like, you know what? Suddenly my whole life was like, I'm thinking, I'm not going to do this. So I said, you know what? I'm not going to do this. And, I won't even tell you the rest of the story, which is my name was not even on the call sheet. The actor playing Meg Mucklebones was curiously played by an actor named Meg Mucklebones.
Wow.
So I thought, you know what? I'm not going to, I said, thank you. I'm not going to go underwater. And then they ended up doing something else and it worked just fine.
Well, Bob, I'm actually really curious. Is there a role in theater that you've never done that you really want to do?
I would say before I'm too old, I would still like to play Willie Loman in Death of a Salesman. I think I still have the energy to pull that off. So yeah, that would probably be it. I did another late career Arthur Miller play called Broken Glass. And I would say some of the language in that is kind of a warm up for Death of a Salesman, even though Miller wrote it years after. So I would say that's something I could still see myself doing.
Well, I'm curious, when you're acting, how much of the real Bob Picardo do you put in your roles? And do you think it's possible for an actor to ever play a character without any of themselves in that role?
I think it's definitely possible to play a character. I mean, obviously, there is always your face and your features, no matter how you cover them up and change them.
Well, no, more emotionally or, in that respect.
Yeah. I mean, I once did a small budget horror movie. I'm not a fan of what they call it, torture. They call it certain kinds of horror called torture porn or whatever. I don't mean porn in the sense of porn, but you know what I mean, where it's sure, Saw and Saw 2 and Saw 3 and Saw 4 and all the Saws.
Saw 17 and
And I did a small movie called Censored, Sensored, and I played a really despicable character. And I like to think that there is not a shred of me, even in my affect in that. I normally have more irony and certainly some humor, even playing a villain character. And I worked very hard to have to be like a blank slate, to have no affect.
Is that harder for you?
That character. Yeah, it was. And it was an interesting experiment. To work on the role, but I still don't like that kind of movie. I don't, there's long discussions about different actors who work different ways that, and the cliche is the actor who works from the inside out and the actor who works from the outside in. If you're an inside out actor, that's the sort of the method acting school. You work on the emotional reality of the character, and then you create the externals, how he walks, how he carries himself, how he, how he gestures and all that comes after finding the emotional truth of the character. Then what used to be called the sort of British school of acting, which was you worked on the externals first. If the character, you look at the script for clues, and then you figure out what the character's physical life is, and that feeling could follow form rather than precede form, so to speak, right? The outer.
Sure.
And then I would always joke that, that I was one of those actors who worked from the outside out.
Well, I'm curious, a lot of the characters you portray are actually very intelligent. Do you feel smart yourself?
I do play. I do play very intelligent characters. Certainly the
Or
doctor.
Is it all acting, Bob?
Well, I used to feel smart. I graduated Yale with high honors when I was 20 years old. However, that was the end of my formal education. So now I don't feel so smart anymore. But when I was younger, I felt smart. I love to play verbal characters who handle language well and also speak quickly. I think one of the keys to science fiction is to speak as quickly as you can. There's so much exposition in science fiction that it's really helpful. It's really, really helpful to have at least 2 or 3 fast talkers in your Star Trek cast, which we certainly did. Janeway was a great fast talker, myself, and certainly Roxanne Dawson playing B'Elanna Torres, and Mr. Neelix was a pretty fast talker. So it's good to have those high speed. And I think that the writers told me that the Voyager scripts used to be 3 or 4 pages longer than the Enterprise scripts, the show right after us, because of the number of fast talkers in our script, in our cast.
Wow.
I do tend to play intelligent characters. I would say the one from my career that your audience may have seen, that the glaring exception to that was Coach Ed Cutlip on the Wonder Years.
Yeah.
Who had an IQ few points lower than Flipper, I think.
Well, since you mentioned Star Trek, I will get lynched if I don't actually ask you some Star Trek and sci-fi questions. So I'm curious, though, because I don't want to ask you stuff 10,000 other people have. You directed 2 episodes of Voyager, Alter Ego, and One Small Step, I believe. Did you have any difficulty making the transition from being an actor to a director? And what was the biggest challenge you had as a director?
Well, what I had in my favor is that I'm the kind of actor who looks always at my function in the whole. If I'm in a play, I look at how my character functions dramatically in the whole. I like to, and some actors think that's not a good way to be, that you should look entirely from your character's point of view, what your character, rather than servicing the entire story. So I've always had that kind of what's been told to me by other actors as a director's point of view, a director's mind. And I enjoyed directing on Voyager very much. I was just on another podcast, my friends, Delta Flyers, Robbie McNeil and Garrett Wong, talking a little bit about Alter Ego. I wasn't crazy about the first script that I got. It was sort of a Fatal Attraction story. And I loved the second script I got, One Small Step, because it was about the early heroes of space exploration, how we stand on the shoulders of giants. And that story I loved, and I thought it had a tremendous emotional pull to it. My overall feeling was that if I had started directing as a younger actor, I would have definitely done much more directing in my career. As it was, it seemed kind of high stress. It seemed to me that directing in television, you're really there to service the pattern of the show. So you don't have necessarily a lot of freedom. It's really just a tremendous pressure to keep the schedule. And I loved, as an actor, being responsible just for myself. It was, so I thought it's going to take me years to learn how to relax into this second career. And most importantly, in order to direct a lot, you have to step away from acting for a significant amount of time. The business doesn't quite, unless you're very, very famous, unless you're a very famous actor, if you start directing maybe when George Clooney was already a movie star, they'll let you do both. But if you're just a kind of a journeyman, utility character guy like me, with, who, if I, after Voyager, if I now I'm a director, then I would have had to have stopped acting.
Ah, I see. Well, okay. So really serious question for you here. Are Star Trek uniforms comfortable?
Well, if you don't eat too much over the Christmas break, yeah. The wardrobe department used to say I was the only male actor who never had to wear the girdle after the holiday break.
Hilarious.
The only thing I didn't really like about Voyager, we had an undergarment, like a leotard that snapped under the crotch, and I'm not a fan of things that snap under the crotch.
For obvious reasons, yeah.
Tight, and there are obstacles down there that have to decide whether to go left or right, and
they're not holographic, yeah.
Yeah. So I was not crazy about that, but the good thing is it really improves your posture, because the wonderful costumes that our Bob Blackman did for almost all the Star Trek shows, I think all of them. They made you look great, but you had to really stand upright. In order for the costume to look sleek, you had to be very vertical and have your shoulders back and all that. And fortunately, I made the decision early on that because the Doctor was a technological creature, that I would borrow some of the same artifice that Brent Spiner had done on Next Generation, playing an android, because I wanted the character to have a very bland affect and to have no personality, but also to seem slightly mechanical. Even though as a hologram, there's no real logic to that. Had he been based entirely on his programmer, Louis Zimmerman, why not copy Louis Zimmerman's bad posture as well? It could easily have been that. He could have had the worst posture ever if the wireframe parameters of his body had been simply copied from his programmer. Brent Spiner's character, being an android, had the funny eyes and the funny makeup color and all that stuff to constantly remind the audience that he was not a human. But I looked just like a human character. So I wanted to have some behavioral things that would suggest the artifice, knowing that I could, as I became more human, I had some place to go to, because I had started so far in one direction.
So what made you decide to write the Holograms Handbook, which I have here? It is hilarious and poignant. It's a great little ditty for those who haven't read. What made you want to do that?
My buddy Jeff Yeager. I am my friend Jeff Yeager, an actor I've known for many years. Jeff was the original, one of the leads on the original V. He was guest starring in an episode called Flesh and Blood, a 2-part episode, as a sort of renegade, as a vigilante hologram who was trying to spring holograms from their human, dominated slavery. And because he was, and I had nothing to do with Jeff getting cast. He auditioned, got the part, and I was delighted that my friend was guest starring on the show. And he said, so tell me about holograms and Star Trek. And I started telling him all the do's and don'ts of Star Trek holograms. Well, we can do this and we can't do that, and we don't eat and we don't, blah, blah. And he said, you should write a book. And I said, I said, write a book and I'll do the art for it. And I went, okay.
That's great.
So we split the money and it paid for his wedding. So that's how the book came to be.
That's awesome. Well, Bob, one of my favorite Voyager episodes is Latent Image, which is the struggle of the Doctor to cope with the moral and ethical conflicts of life and death choices. Mm-hmm. 3-part question here. Number 1, I'd really love to know what you thought when you first read the script. Number 2, I'd love to know if you had to do anything special to prepare for such an intense episode. And number 3, had you previously read Dante's La Vita Nuova, which, spoiler alert, everyone, you read a portion of at the end of the episode?
I'll answer in reverse order. I had not read La Vita Nuova. I was very good friends with Joe Menosky, one of our Star Trek writers, and I think it was he who told me I'm working on a script that's the birth of the Doctor's human soul.
Yeah.
And he described it as sort of a Sophie's Choice situation where the Doctor, in making a choice, the Doctor creates a conflict in his own programming and it starts to fall apart. He has basically a nervous breakdown in human terms. And it is my favorite dramatic episode. I have, I always say that, I have 3 or 4, as far as my character's episodes that featured him, I would say Tinker, Tenor, Doctor, Spy is my favorite comedic one, with maybe the Andy Dick episode, Message in a Bottle, being the runner-up. And then I love the romance of Someone to Watch Over Me, where the My Fair Lady episode, where the Doctor is teaching his star pupil 7 of 9 how to behave on a date, and then he inadvertently falls in love with her, like Henry Higgins and Liza Doolittle. But a Latent Image I always mention is my favorite dramatic one.
And I just want to interject and say it's not only a phenomenal Star Trek episode, but it's actually, even if you don't like sci-fi and you watch this episode, it is a phenomenal piece of television that I think everyone who likes to watch TV should see. It's just a beautiful, beautiful, 50 minutes.
Oh, thank you. And it ends with a certain ambiguity that Star Trek, at least, our show, Voyager, was fashioned much more like the original series, with very few 2-part episodes, no long arcs, no long plot arcs. There might be relationship arcs, but no long plot arcs in the show. Every show had to be self-contained, and that really everything had to be wrapped up in a neat little bundle at the end. And I remember there was some discussion that, I think our executive producer wanted to cut the last scene because he didn't quite get how it ended. He thought it was, and I thought,
the best scene. I
love that scene because it's such a complex thing that Janeway is doing. Mm-hmm. Just weathering this psychological storm that the Doctor is suffering from, to be there with him, just to be present as a friend when someone is having a dark night of the soul.
Yeah.
The way the Doctor is such a, it's such a gesture of friendship and leadership on her part.
And love, yeah.
That I love it as well. I think it's great. And I love that. I love how that ends.
Yeah, agreed. Did you keep any cool props from Voyager or Stargate?
Star Trek, they're used to actors walking off with props in the past, so that they pretty much took them right out of our hands. So no, I did not. I did get a few set pieces Many of them went to auction for charity. I raised quite a bit of money for the Pediatric AIDS Foundation back then, and also the State Theater of California, which is the Pasadena Playhouse, where I worked a number of times, raised money for them. So my set pieces got auctioned, and I think I walked away with a pair of my boots and my last day communicator, and that's it.
How fun. Well, Bob, do you think Richard Woolsey is a nice guy?
I think he's a dick. I think Richard Woolsey was a complete dick, and then he had a slow, transformation just because the writers were very deft and they decided they liked me. I don't know how he had not only he had like negative personality when he was first introduced. He was a one-off guest star, introduced in an episode that was too good to cut, but it was too long to air as a single episode. So they decided to turn it into a two-parter, but then they suddenly needed filler material. And they thought, filler material?
Let's get Robert Picardo.
Because they knew me, I guess, from Trek. And I was brought in simply as a connective tissue so they could replay other scenes. And my character was there to determine whose head was going to roll for this tragedy that had happened. So I interviewed everybody. The cast was great to me. I didn't know much about Stargate at the time. I had watched a little bit of the first 2 years when it was on Showtime. Yeah. But then when it moved over to Sci-Fi, I hadn't seen it.
Well, I'm curious. If the EMH and Woolsey decide to go to fisticuffs, who do you think would win?
Well, technically, I think the EMH would win because he can sort of program his strength, I think, a little bit. So I would say, but I also think that Woolsey, the DMH would think that Woolsey was kind of a boring cretin, I think, even though they have certain aspects of boring cretinism in common. Let's face it, both characters, when you first meet them, you're not sure you're going to like them.
It does make them lovable in the end, though, which is because they overcome that journey.
Oh, well, the writers, when they offered me to take over the Atlantis expedition, I said, wait a minute, guys. The guy, nobody likes him. He has no leadership experience. He spent all of his time criticizing other people's leaders. He's a coward. He runs away from danger. I said, how are you going to make him into a leader? They said, that's our problem. I said, great, I'll do it.
If you, Bob Picardo, could step through the Stargate and go anywhere in the universe, where would you go?
Wow. Well, can you go back in time, or you can only just go in places in the present?
Just present day.
Oh, gosh. I don't know. I guess I'd go to one of the pleasure planets and get a massage.
Have you ever considered quitting acting? And if yes, what kept you going?
After my early success in the New York theater, playing two leads on Broadway when I was 23 and 24 years old, went to recreate the play with Jack Lemmon at 25, started to do some work in California, but then around 27, 28, doing some television guest stars and all that, I thought, this is it. Is this as good as it's going to get? And then I bought the, Law School for Dummies book, like I was going to take the LSATs or whatever. And I thought, I don't want to go to business school. I really don't want to go to law school. I don't know if I have the discipline at this point to go back, pick up a year and a half of pre-med credits, including organic chemistry, to go to med school. I was considering all of that. And then I was cast in a play that really took off my career, helped my career take off in Los Angeles, called Beyond Therapy, Christopher Durang play. Very funny. Sadly, the play can't really be done anymore since the AIDS epidemic. Anyway, we did this play. The great Paul Benedict, sadly, we've lost him. Paul Benedict directed it. One of the funniest performances ever is in The Goodbye Girl. He plays Richard Dreyfuss, director in the Richard III production that they're doing, where Richard III is going to be gay. Hilarious. That play was quite a success, and that sort of jump-started my career, and that's when I really started working more. And then, of course, a few years later, I was cast in China Beach, which was a great, great experience.
Great show.
And but that I would say that my last time I looked back and thought, am I going to do this my whole life? It's not unusual when you see the end of your 20s on the horizon. I think a lot of people kind of jump ship at 30, because it's really about, at first it's, as a young actor, it's all about, am I good enough? Am I going to work professionally? Somebody going to pay me to do this? And then once they start paying you to do it, then you go, is this going to make me happy? The first thing is just, can I prove to myself I can do it? Then it's like, am I going to be happy doing this? Or with whatever level of success I have? And that's a much harder question to answer. Yeah. But I still love being an actor. I'm here in New York working on the Apple TV show Dickinson now. And I just love to go to work. I just do. I still love acting. Have never stopped.
Bob, what advice would you give to actors who are starting out in their careers, or actors who are in a career where it's stalled a little bit and they're having that conflict inside themselves? What advice would you give them?
That's always tough to do. I mean, we give joke advice when we're younger, check your fly before you go on stage, that kind of stuff. For young actors, I remember clearly when Estelle Parsons came to speak to us. After I got out of Yale, I went to a professional theater workshop called Circle in the Square, still exists. Some others, graduates, Philip Seymour Hoffman, years after me, and Ken Olin, and a bunch of people who went on to great success. Anyway, Estelle Parsons said, what advice would I give a young actor? If you can do anything else, and I mean anything, and still be happy, do that. Which is good. That's good advice.
Do you have a celebrity crush?
Do I have one, or did I ever have one?
Do you? Do you have one today?
I get crush on people in the news world. My biggest crush right now is Heidi Prisbilla, who is a newswoman on MSNBC. I just want to hold the door for her one day and say, "Oh, love your work."
Let's talk about your music. You're a phenomenal singer, and I'm curious: have you been into music your whole life, or was this something you did later?
Well, I don't read music. I've loved singing my whole life. I was in the choir in high school. We had a group called the Quakers Dozen, pun on Baker's Dozen, in high school. I was in a Yale undergraduate singing group, and it was great fun. It was like being in a fraternity, except I didn't want to be in a fraternity, but I loved singing with these guys. We still get together. I went to the 100th reunion, the 100th anniversary of our singing group about 3 or 4 years ago.
Oh, that's cool.
Still, the repertoire changes over the years, but I still remember some of our basic songs. Our opening number is the Norwegian national anthem. So
really?
I know the Norwegian national anthem if you want to hear it.
Yeah, absolutely. Hold on. Ladies and gentlemen, a Memories of Moonbird exclusive. It's Bob Picardo doing the Norwegian national anthem. Hit it.
All right.
Ja, vi älskar det till landet som det stiga fram. Faret väbbet över vandet med till sin hem. Älskar det till tankar, pavra foragmor. Agen sagar natt som sänka. Dro med pavojor. Agen sagar natt som sanka dro. Med pavojor.
Could have picked a better key.
Well, I'm actually curious, Bob. Is there a musical dream that, like, if you could snap your fingers and have any musical dream come true as a performer, what would it be?
Oh, gosh, sure. Well, I mean, the overall dream, when I first started coming back to New York for 2.5 years ago, was to get in a musical on Broadway. I had done, I hadn't sung in years, and I started to sing on Star Trek again, mostly because of a misunderstanding between me and one of the producers when I said I wanted to listen to opera in sickbay, not sing. I never said sing opera. I wanted to listen to it because I thought it was funny that a character with no emotional life and no affect would play this incredibly passionate human art form for amusement. I just thought that was a funny thing to see my placid,
yeah, for sure,
unemotional face with this incredibly huge emotions being pumped out of the sickbay speaker system. Okay, so they misunderstand it and had me sing opera, which was terrifying, but it worked out okay. Since Voyager, I did a number of musicals. I've probably done 5 or 6 in California or in regional theater. And so I'm grateful to Star Trek for a number of things, but also...
Does your musical dream include doing a musical?
Yeah, doing a Broadway musical. That's what I would love to do. I can't even say which one, I guess I'd like to be in a new musical. And there have been, I've been in backers auditions for projects that never happened that got really close, where I thought, oh, this is going to be it. This will be my Broadway music. I did a lead on Broadway when I was 23. The following season, I did a second lead.
It's amazing.
To a major movie star. And I thought, oh, I'll be back. I'll go to California for a while, but I'll be back on Broadway. Cut to 43 years later, 42 years, and I finally did an off-Broadway musical. New York has plenty of very, very talented performers. They don't miss you when you're gone. They don't go, oh, whatever happened to that guy? I want my own number in a musical. I want like the sit down, you're rocking the boat number.
From your mouth to the theater god's ears.
Mm-hmm.
Overall, do you think there's been a key to your success as an artist?
Well, I'm grateful to God. I've always looked at your talents. It's like the Bible parable about your talents and burying them in the ground or using your talents. I look at them, I know a talent is an ancient coin, but it's also a word we use to apply to whatever natural gifts you've been granted by the Creator. And I like to think that when I decided to be an actor, I was following that impulse because I had been given some particular talent, and it was my responsibility to be a steward of it and to use it as I chose, the way the various servants do with the talent coins that are given by their master in the Bible story. So I like to think of it, that I'm grateful to God for having really been able to act my whole career, not having to do anything else. And I also am a collaborator. I believe in, it was in acting school, there's a whole thing about creative conflict and all that. And some students work from they can't separate real conflict between two people from the artistic conflict of characters on stage. You hear these stories about Marlon Brando and Vivian Leigh, and when they did the movie, and then the blah, blah, blah. It's like, I really believe that you can be a human being and gracious to work with and easy to get along with and still be completely convincing as an axe murderer or as a loving father and all that. You don't have to put your scene partner and your fellow actors through your psychodrama as an experience working with you. You can be a great gentleman, and then the moment the lights go up and you're playing that character, then you can be absolutely anything with complete convincing quality. I don't have a lot of patience with actors where you have to call me, my character name all the time or for all 4 months that we're shooting this. And you know what I mean? I'm not going to mention anybody in particular, but there's a lot of actors that I admire their work tremendously, but it doesn't mean I would necessarily I'd want to be in the movie with them. I'd rather just go see it.
Well, Bob, I am really excited to ask you about your work with the Planetary Society because I'm a huge lover of space and science myself. So how did that come to be? And how did you end up on the executive board? One
of the great gifts of being in Star Trek is that you're part of a saga that has inspired so many people, more than 2 generations now of people who go into science and technology and exploration, people that are astronauts, people that are, and even if they were not necessarily Star Trek fans, they were inspired by some other kind of science fiction. But being on Star Trek, you become part of this sort of inspirational continuum, and you get credited in a funny way for being, this amazing vision of the future is credited with inspiring them to go into their careers. So you get to meet real people.
That's so cool.
That are doing really extraordinary things. My first window into this opportunity that Star Trek was going to give me was when we were only on the air, basically 2.5 years, 3 years. It was the 30th anniversary of Star Trek. So 1998, we had a big event at Space Camp in Huntsville, Alabama. And I'm on stage with 5 men who walked on the moon.
That's incredible.
5 men who walked on the moon. And I'm being asked questions right after them. You know what I mean? It was like the audience, sees a line drawn between inspiration and execution that I never did, but there's a relationship in the public's eye that I used to feel silly being in situations like this. Now I simply go, I'm going to turn it around. It's not about how I feel. It's about what I can learn from this. How can instead of feeling embarrassed to be in the company of five guys on the moon, I'm going to be a sponge and listen and ask questions and learn and just celebrate the fact that.
Wait, so long story short, though, because of Trek, you were eventually asked to take part in the Planetary Society?
Yes. Oh, right. Sorry. I started out with, so as part of that continuum, I was asked by the Planetary Society to do a fundraiser. It was Ray Bradbury's 70th birthday, I think. Oh, cool. And we were going to read selections from his great works, Martian Chronicles, etc.
Fahrenheit 451.
Fahrenheit 451. It was mostly his space works rather than just sci fiction. So I don't remember. There must have been something from that. But I read a lot of stuff from Martian Chronicles. Other readers included Charlton Heston, John Rhys Davies, and then several of my Star Trek colleagues, Jim Russ, John Delancey. And after I did this event and met the two surviving founders of the Planetary Society, sadly, we'd already lost Carl Sagan at a very young age. They said, would you like to be on our advisory council? They wanted someone who would bring their message to the science fiction community that if you really love space, if you love science fiction, you really love science.
Yeah.
And you should check out what we really are doing in space, and you should support that. So I was on the advisory council for many, many years. Now I'm the chairman of the advisory council, and I'm on the executive board, which I was asked to join about 3.5 years ago. We're presently led by Bill Nye, the science guy. Past presidents of the board have been Neil deGrasse Tyson. We have an amazing group of people. I sit around a table with all of these people with advanced degrees, and I just listen and try to understand and try to make my own contribution.
Well, I want to hit you with a couple of rapid fire space science questions.
And
just
be
get
careful,
your
because you don't confuse a cheerleader for space exploration with someone who's an encyclopedia of knowledge. All right.
This is just your opinion.
All right.
So is there a particular technological advancement that you hope we make in your lifetime?
If you consider the discovery of life off of this planet, even just the discovery of microbial life on Mars or on a moon of Jupiter, absolutely. I believe that will happen during my lifetime.
Well, do you think there's actually, quote unquote, intelligent life out there that are sentient beings, not just microbial?
I think it is incredibly arrogant for us to think that we are the only in a cosmos with so many. I mean, look at the number.
The odds alone are in the favor of.
We now have over 3,200 exoplanets that we have discovered in the last 10 years, and many of them are in the Goldilocks zone, where it's not too cold, not too hot, could have liquid water on the planet, could have the temperature range to support higher life forms. So I just think it's arrogant to think that there is not sentient life out there.
Why do you think we should explore space? Because critics of space science would say that we should focus our scientific endeavors and monies on Earth.
Because we're going to outgrow Earth. So our future is in space. It's very short-sighted to say, yeah. And also, one of the three core enterprises of the Planetary Society is planetary defense. And because we could easily, we don't want to go the way of the dinosaurs. The dinosaurs didn't support space exploration, and look what happened to them. If we get hit by an asteroid and get wiped out as a culture, well, then we're going to think, oh, you know what? We really should have worked on that space laser that could have deflected the damn asteroid and saved all of our lives. But we will eventually outgrow the planet, and it could be sooner than later, and it could be because we end up destroying large parts of it, or we could just simply outgrow it. So if anybody who thinks that we don't need to go into space is not thinking ahead.
Does it bother you as both an actor and a lover of science when science is not actually represented correctly in movies and TV and entertainment?
Yeah, well, within reason. Star Trek is embedded in real science. Neil deGrasse Tyson was said, which do you prefer, the science of Star Trek or the science of Star Wars? And he said, Star Wars, what science?
Yeah,
so
exactly.
I agree, Star Trek is embedded in real science. We do say some silly things, a dark matter asteroid, I think, was one of them. I mean, I don't think it's possible to have it dark, even theoretically, but maybe I'm wrong until we find one. There's always a science advisor on Star Trek. Ours went on to become a very successful writer in his own right. Andre Bormanis was our science writer on our science, advisor. I did catch him on a few medical things, even my primitive pre-med career, because he was an astronomer and didn't have a lot of life science background. So I caught him up on a few things that we changed. I would call and say, I really should say this word instead of that word. I can't, blood is a tissue, so I should refer to these the first tissue to be attacked by the Borg nanoprobes, not the first cells of the patient's blood. It should be the first tissue is the patient's blood. He said, well, that sounds weird. And I said, yeah, I know, but it's
accurate. Yeah.
And they would call back and say, yeah, you're right. So, I like things to be embedded in real science. I really hate it when politicians lie about science or give an opinion as if it were a science fact. I really don't like that at all.
Completely agree with you.
I also think that, honestly, you can't pick and choose as to what you believe in technology. If you really think that the Earth was created 6,000 years ago, I think you should surrender your cell phone. I just think, I mean, how can you? I believe, I believe in this device, but I don't believe in the fossil record.
Yeah,
come on. So have a little consistency in your thinking. I don't see an inconsistency between science and faith. Never have. Right? People who think that science is the devil's work. Come on, science. We were given these minds by our Creator, and science came out of the critical thinking.
Correct.
That we were given by the Creator. So critical thinking leads to science. It's all a gift from God.
Yeah. One of the foundations of science is actually that true scientists never say, this is the answer. They say, this is our best guess based upon the current information we have.
Exactly.
And scientists are willing to be wrong.
Mm-hmm. But this whole thing about, right now we're in a pandemic and we've been blessed to get these vaccines on an incredibly fast track. So people go, oh, well, they're not safe. Well, this new CNN documentary I just watched last night called Race for the Vaccine, which is really good and very interesting. But it shows how one of the scientists, the woman who is the chief research person for Pfizer, said, all we did was we accelerated the process but the process is the same. All of the science we did is the same. We just had unlimited financial resources, and we did it as we accelerated the process, but the process remained as rigorous as it would, because they all understand the stakes for something like this. So this whole, if you had this sort of vague, generalized distrust of the vaccine just because it seemed to happen too quickly for your perception, watch the darn documentary and see exactly how many brilliant minds were working in a competition. Ultimately, they're competing with each other to come up with the best way. And there were several that turned out to be equally good or almost equally good. And the saddest thing was there was one team that was doing really, really well that had a negative side effect that wasn't even a threat to someone's health, but they just fell off the map, and all of their millions in investment. I don't want to spoil it. But there was some very exciting things in this documentary. But my overall point is, it's not possible to be a Star Trek fan and to not be vaccinated.
It's just a hypo spray.
Yeah, constantly saves the day in Star Trek, the show you love. We're facing this terrible pandemic, as frightening as any enemy we ever faced in Star Trek. The vaccines have come and saved the day. And if you say, no, I don't believe that, then please stop watching Star Trek, because you're insulting the core principle of all of our work, and certainly of Gene Roddenberry's vision.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, that's really wonderfully put as well. Thank you. I'd like to ask you a couple life questions. Bob Picardo, what would be the title of your autobiography?
Let me see.
I'm glad I've stumped you a little.
Boy, that's a tough one.
We can come back to it if you want.
It's really, let's come back to it.
Okay. Are there any books that you think should be mandatory reading for all human beings?
The Denial of Death by Ernest Becker, mentioned by Woody Allen in Annie Hall, is one of the books you should read. I think that's why I read it.
What would you name your boat if you had one?
The Medical Emergency.
What's the dumbest way that you've been injured, Bob?
God, there have been so many. I guess the dumbest way, when I was a little kid, I wanted to go out the back door of the house, and we had at the top of the door, there was a sliding latch that was meant for a grown person. And I wasn't a little kid. I was probably, I want to say 13 years old. And I was jumping up and down, trying to hit the latch at the top of the door so I could go out the back door. And I caught this finger on a curtain hook and tore my whole finger. You could still see the scar.
Wow.
Right there when I was 13 years old. That's probably the dumbest, but it's a very tough field with a lot of entries. So that's the one that occurs to me now.
What's something that really makes you laugh?
David Hewlett in Stargate Atlantis made me laugh more than most other actors. He had a way of complaining about everything that was so hilarious and so seamless.
Yeah, he's brilliant.
That he made me laugh. And not a lot of actors make me laugh on the set as much as he did. Looking forward to, we're having a little Zoom reunion, so I'm looking forward to it. What else makes me laugh? Walter Matthau in The Sunshine Boys and in The Odd Couple. Jack Lemmon in The Odd Couple and Some Like It Hot.
Yeah, classics.
Yeah. I mean, and I should say now, working with, if I could wish any 24-year-old actor a great experience, work with someone like Jack Lemmon for a year, because he'd been a movie star for over 25 years then and was so gracious and kind, and I learned so much being around him that, I feel that's a memory I treasure. I have a Hirschfeld copy of the two of us, in the hallway to my bedroom here in the New York apartment. So
that's cool. What's a movie that still makes you cry no matter how many times you watch it?
Ordinary People, Robert Redford's directing debut. I'd cry if I watched it right now. I don't know what it is, but it has nothing to do with me. It's a WASP family with, very pent up emotions, but it's just the pain in those actors, Timothy Hutton's performance and Donald Sutherland. I really love that movie. I remember I went out on a date with a girl and I wept the first time I saw it so much that she never went out with me again.
When you think back to what life was like for that kid in Philadelphia in the 50s and 60s, and you compare it to today where you're at, do you look back and think that life has gotten better or worse or stayed the same?
Oh, gosh. I would say life has gotten better. There's something about being allowed to do what you love doing for so many years that's a nice feeling.
That's cool. Bob, what's your favorite smell?
Oh, man. Ooh, maybe eucalyptus.
As an Italian man, can you make a mean red sauce?
Yeah, I can make all kinds of red sauces. Thank you. Yes. But my brother, who was a hopeless non-cook years ago, has gotten really better than me. So I'm jealous. I don't follow recipes. I figure stuff out. I hate to look at a recipe. But for example, my pizza dough, I've been making pizza since I was 11 years old. My buddy Bill Nye, the science guy, sent me a dough recipe that was just better than mine.
Huh.
So now I use that. So I'm not too old to learn.
I think you're going to need to share that so I can put it on my webpage for your episode.
All right.
One of my favorite questions to ask on the show, which my better half Jolene came up with, is this. If you could sit down for 4 hours in an old-timey pub in Europe with one person from all of human history, alive or dead, excluding your own family members or any kind of religious prophet, who would you sit down with? What would you drink? And what's the first question you'd want to ask them?
Oh, my God. Your wife is really sweet and smart, and I don't know that I could sit across a table from her after that. Boy, all right. Okay. Wow. I would say I'll go with Pavarotti. I will go with a Super Tuscan and some appetizers. And the first question I'll ask him is, I had three that came into my head right at once. One is, why did you never learn to read music? That was the first one. The second one is, when did you know you wanted to sing? What age were you when you knew you wanted to sing for the rest of your life? And finally, do you fall in love with your leading ladies? Which one would I ask first? I'll go with the last one. I'll go with the leading lady one.
I'm gonna allow all three just because I think they're great questions. You get to ask all three. If you could travel in time, Bob Picardo, where would you go and why?
Wow. I would love to meet. I don't know if this is not a fair answer. I would love to meet without them knowing. The Back to the Future fantasy. I would like to meet my parents, when they were like in their early 30s. I think that would be fun.
That's a great answer, actually. Well, Bob, do you think that the overall arc of a human's life, birth, family, friends, love, work, and death, etc., is that different today than it was thousands of years ago? And if not, then despite all of our technology and advancements, what do you think is actually the meaning of life?
Well, I suppose, I guess because the overall arc, if you want to say, is birth and then adolescence and then separating yourself from the family and finding some way of livelihood and then building your own family and then at some point preparing for, I don't like the expression of auguring into death, but preparing yourself for the end of your life. If that's all the basic, if that's still the same basic arc, I mean, in modern man, we just have so much noise in our lives, and it's so distracting that it's easy to spend most of your day being distracted, a good chunk of your life. More primitive man, obviously, the whole thing was about not being killed or eaten or whatever, so you had to be... so much of it was just basic, I must stay vigilant for survival. We must stay vigilant to filter out the incredible noise that not only competes for our attention, but overwhelms our attention. I mean, the last 4 years in our country, if you paid any attention at all to the political regime, the noise factor was overwhelming to me. It was, I wanted government to just leave me alone and let me have a moment's peace. And yet I didn't feel that could happen. Everything was in my face and screaming at me all the time. And I thought, is this the way it's going to feel when I finally go, that it's like there's this barrage of noise and it'll be a relief in a way to finally pass on to the next dimension, just because I have been so, the critical mass of clutter and noise will just make life no longer worth living. I don't want to, that's a very sad thing to feel, but that's how I felt a lot of recent history in this country. And I just wish that we could all turn the volume down from 11. That's all. Turn it back down to 5 or 6 and all enjoy life a little bit more.
What quality do you most admire in human beings?
Oh, kindness.
Speaking of death, are you afraid of dying? And what would be your biggest disappointment if you died tomorrow?
Biggest disappointment, of course, would be not knowing my children longer and possibly meeting a grandson or child in the future. And am I afraid of dying? I guess it depends on the day. I do have, obviously I'm a cradle believer. So my faith tells me that after death, it's actually going to be a lot better.
Yeah.
So, but there are times, there are certain phobias when you get trapped or you're in a tight space and you realize you're claustrophobic, that you feel that, I think that most phobias ultimately are a fear of death. If you're trapped in an elevator and you can't get, all of fears of confined spaces or whatever your phobia might be are ultimately can be traced to fear of death.
I agree.
So I guess I like to think that I don't fear it, but I also have at times when I have an irrational fear, even if it doesn't appear to be of death, I think I'm sophisticated enough to understand that it really is. So yes, it doesn't make logical sense if you're a believer to be, to fear death. But I guess you just want to do all the things you want to do.
Well, wait, and in that notion, I mean, I understand you want to be comfortable saying essentially, I believe in something greater than myself. So if I die, I believe I'm going to be taken care of or go into the light or whatever it is, But then there's the human experience but it also is scary to think of all this just ending.
Norman Lear, one of our great television producers, there was a wonderful article about him. I think he just turned 95, and he said, I don't mind going. It's the leaving that I dread.
Yeah. Meaning
it's the people that I leave behind that make me sad about going. It's not the fear of going. It's the sadness of leaving. And I think that makes a lot of sense when you really deeply love your friends, members of your family, especially the younger generations that are going to live on well beyond, and leaving them is the saddest part, I think.
I think that's beautiful. Yeah. Well, quoting Marcel Proust, to what faults do you feel most indulgent?
To what faults do I feel most indulgent? Well, let's see. It's still fun. You think that when you get in your 60s, you would get over when the seasons change and girls are in their summer clothes, you would think you would go, no, I don't need to look at this anymore, but you still do. That's one. I think it would be great to be able to stop at 1.5 glasses of that red wine you love. Sometimes you don't. I think I've gotten beyond the point where I say things that I regret leaving where you walk out of the party and you go, well, I wish I hadn't said that. I haven't had that regret in a very long time. I don't know if that means
That's good.
I'm unaware of all the stupid things I say. Could just be that. Could be lack of awareness.
Bob, if heaven exists and assuming you arrive, what would you like to hear God say the moment you meet?
I loved you on Star Trek. Okay, no, I think I would love to hear him say, welcome. You're welcome. We're happy to have you here. Would be great. What else? Hey,
whiskey's on the left.
Yeah. Your mom. There's your mom. There's your dad, who you didn't get to know very well because you lost him at 9. Now you can hang out as much as you want. There's your dog, Rusty, who was poisoned by the crazy neighbor when you were only 5.
Really?
Yeah. I mean, there's all sorts of things I'd love to hear.
Well, Bob, what superpower would you choose?
What superpower would I choose? It wouldn't be reading minds. Too much responsibility.
Yeah. And talk about noise.
And most people go flying just because you wouldn't have to, you wouldn't have to be in an airplane anymore, although there'd be lots of, if you could fly, can you imagine who's going to do air traffic control for you? You're going to fly into something and that'll be it anyway. So.
And where does your luggage go? There's
exactly
stuff here.
That's a very good point. Superpower,
Invisibility?
Invisibility, no. I would say, having whatever a transporter is, or just, to be able to, how about that? To be able to travel in
teleport.
I'd like to travel through a fiber optic cable. How about that?
Okay, you want to just call it teleportation?
Teleportation, that would be good. I'll settle for that. But I'd settle for fiber optic cables too, but then I could only go to designated places.
It's like a teleportation, you can go wherever you want.
Anywhere I want. All right, we'll settle. We'll call it that.
If you could know the answer in absolute and complete truth to only one question, what question would you ask?
Well, I think it would have to be, what is the meaning and purpose of life?
Wonderful. If you could go back in time and talk to teenage Bob Picardo, what would you say to him?
Yes, you will get to sleep with her someday. That was a joke, all right? That was a joke.
Hilarious. Bob, what's next for you?
I'm enjoying my work on the Apple show Dickinson. Like I said, I'd love to still get the opportunity to act as much as I want, to travel as much as I want, to eat a good meal now and then, and have some nice wine, to be in the company of beloved friends and family, and to sing on Broadway sometime between now and the wrong side of the grass.
Excellent. Well, Bob, the last thing we do on the show is a little game I have called 299 Philosophical and Life Questions with Moonbird. There's 299 questions here I've collected from friends, family, and the internet. You get to pick two numbers from 1 to 299. I'll ask you those two questions, and you can give me your answer. What would be your two numbers?
All right. Well, let's pick 67. It's my age.
67. Okay. And what's your second one?
Let's pick 27, my birth date.
All right. 67 and 27. 67, what is your greatest fear? And also the first time this question's being asked on the show. Thank you, Bob.
What is my greatest fear? Premature burial.
That's awful. Oh, God, being buried alive would suck so bad. Okay, number 27. What kind of parent do you think you are?
Supportive. Not a very interesting answer, but if I had to pick one word, I'll settle for that. Loving is probably the more obvious one, but I think supportive is ultimately, I think is really the kind of the most, at least the last year where, both my daughters were in New York at the worst point in the pandemic and all that. I just wanted to be as emotionally supportive on the phone and on, FaceTime and whatever as I could be, because it was just, I think, it was a tough haul for everybody. Premature Burial was actually the name of a Vincent Price movie, I think, too. That's, if you look it up.
Well, I know you and I briefly spoke about food, which is something we're both very passionate about. Before we go, I'm just curious to end on a lighter note. What is your favorite food, and do you have something you just really love cooking more than others?
Oh, God. I love making pizza. There are infinite varieties. I love cooking for others. I think that when my father died and I was 9 years old, how do you hang out with your mother when you're 9? You help her make homemade pasta or whatever. I learned how to make noodles at that age. So whenever I cook, I feel like I am capturing some of the spirit of my mother and passing it on. And I think my brother feels the same way. Ironically, both the boys in the family cook way more than both of the women.
Interesting.
But, I love to cook so many things. I deeply miss pork Italian sausage, but the cruelty of eating red meat has finally gotten to me. And I know my consciousness, if and when it's ever fully elevated, I will probably be a vegan, but I haven't gotten there yet. But because pigs are as smart as dogs, I just don't eat pork anymore. And beef is the second, largest creator of factors influencing global warming after, fossil fuels. I'm not eating, it's mostly because of the industry of animal slaughter. Yeah. I do, however, and hypocritically still eat chickens because I don't think they're as smart as pigs. And I just haven't gotten off everything. So I still eat chicken and turkey, but I'm working on myself. And I also, as much as I love eating grilled octopus more than almost anything, I'm trying not to eat that because once you've seen the video of the octopus opening the jar to get something out of it, you go, you know what? I didn't think an octopus was that smart. Did
you see that award-winning documentary?
Oh, yeah.
That was on Netflix?
Pretty great.
Yeah,
amazing.
It was great, yeah.
So, yes, so I'm, so the point is when I find a chicken-based Italian sausage, as I had this last trip to New York, that's perfectly delicious, I feel like my quality of life has gone up.
On that note, Bob Picardo, thank you so much for being on the show. You're a wonderful man. It's been great chatting with you, and I wish you nothing but the best. And I hope we all get to see you on Broadway.
Thank you, Daniel. My pleasure. I hope the audience, I hope you severely edit this so that the audience remains completely engaged throughout.
No editing required. Seriously, you are a fascinating human being, and it's just been such a pleasure to talk with you.
Well, thank you. You have as I've said before, you have a very low entertainment threshold.
You take care.
Bye-bye.
Friends and listeners, as some of you may have noticed, we actually didn't get back to the question, what would be the title of Bob's autobiography? But I reached out to him afterwards, and he said to tell you it would be Bald, the Final Frontier. And on that note, if you'd like to check out Bob's website, it's robertpicardo.com, or follow him on social media at Robert Picardo. Man, while you're out there in cyberspace, why don't you head on over to patreon.com/Moonbird and throw a few bucks to the show. You'll get early access, and we can keep on bringing out-of-this-world people like him to interview. And if you want even more Moonbird in your life, and hey, who wouldn't? Head on over to memoriesofamoonbird.com or visit me on social media at Memories of a Moonbird. Stay safe, and to quote another Star Trek icon, live long and prosper, my friends.